I am. Do we have anyone else? So we've got 9 at the meeting, including, okay.
That's it.
I'll call the meeting to order. Columbia Planning and Zoning Commission. For the roll call, Alex, we're seating you for Bob.
Alex is a full member.
I'm sorry, I always get this wrong, don't I?
Yeah, everybody's a full member.
Yeah.
Can you forgive me? Sorry. Okay, so you, Flo, you've got the attendance.
Yes. I do.
Paula, any changes to the agenda?
None.
Okay, the meeting minutes of November 9th, 2020. Any corrections, anybody? I read through them. They look excellent.
No.
Oh, okay with me.
I saw a beep from Vera. Okay, I'll make a
You saw a
motion that we accept. I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay.
I think Alex snuck in there.
I think so too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any discussion? All those in favor, just raise your hand if, or Vera, you don't have to. Just say aye. Okay, that's
Aye.
unanimous. Thank you.
And
Did anyone have to abstain? I think,
Rich abstains.
yes.
Rick. Yeah.
So motion passes. Audience of citizens. Ann, do you have anything for us?
No, I don't.
How are you?
Good.
It's nice to see you.
Tune in and see what you guys are up to.
Yeah, well, you know, we almost passed on this meeting, but I went for such a long stretch passing on meetings this summer. I thought maybe we should actually work the entire fall.
Well, we didn't have, we cancel the last one. Didn't we cancel the last one?
Yes.
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 Good, I'm glad to hear that. Because I didn't go.
Okay, there's no unfinished business. There's really no new business. All we have is the subdivision regulations.
Not subdivision. Columbia
I mean,
Watershed.
I'm sorry. Revisions to the lake watershed protection,
Right.
potentially, for item 21.4. Paula sent us Paula, do you want to talk about this? I mean, what kind of put this at the front of our agenda, and let me before we go too much farther with this, to all of you on the commission, is this where you want to aim for our effort for the time being? This has been kind of a bit, maybe the largest issue we face, and we haven't had time to address it until very recently. And we do have our prioritized list of regulation revisions that we're hoping to attend to. But this is one that I would hope that we could address because there's no pressure on us this moment to address it. And maybe we can do it in a time frame that is advantageous for the town and for the commission.
Sounds
You know,
good.
the issue here being there's probably more financial pressure than ever on, you know, large landholders in the watershed. And to that extent that there's pressure, do we want to see development occur in a way that our regulations would have it unfold the way they're currently structured? Or are we looking for a different approach to development if there was a change of hand in the land in the subdivision? Hello, Dan. Mr. O'Neill, how are you? Welcome to the meeting. So that's really the underlying question. What, if anything, do we want to do with this? And probably as we get into this over subsequent meetings, understanding what potential development would look like under the current regulations would be a good thing to have a feel for, and what it might look like if we were to take a different approach to our regulations.
This is just looking at some minor changes to section 21.4, which is talking about within the watershed what people will have to do for work, any construction work on their property. what they need to do to mitigate, just to keep the nutrient allocation in check. So that's what this is. I'm not sure that any of this would be changing anything for any of the undeveloped large parcels.
Well, I brought it up because I was hoping this would grow into that also.
Okay.
And if
okay.
it's going to take a lot of extra time before we address what's proposed here, then maybe we defer on it, but we need to have that discussion at some point. In terms of the,
Rick,
yes, Ann?
excuse me, are we talking about, when we say watershed, are we talking about zone B?
A, B, C, all of the
A, B,
zones.
and C,
All of them, thank you.
all of them. So Paula, why don't you go over what you sent us
Okay.
in terms of the watershed regulations?
There isn't a great deal of change from the existing regulations. This draft, I don't know it as well as I once did. I haven't touched this since October 23rd, 2 years ago, other than just glancing through it again the other day. The thrust of the charge from the commission was to, can't we figure out a way within the regulations to let people do a one-time self-mitigating, put a shed in without having to go through the whole nutrient allocation worksheet and change their, the current regulations say that if you're, anytime you're doing work on your property, if you're not in compliance with the phosphorus runoff calculations, that you then need to mitigate and make it 10% better. And that's even if you, we had one property that was on Hunt Road that they wanted to put a little roof, tiny little roof over their front porch, right by their front door, not a porch, I shouldn't call it a porch, a stoop, right over the stoop so that they could get it, turn the key in the lock without getting drenched when it was raining. And they had to mitigate 10%, make the whole property 10% better than it was. That was the charge with this. Whenever I start looking at regulations for revisions of a section, I always look to see if while we're here, can we make them a little bit better in terms of user-friendly and a little bit easier to read and understand. So that's the biggest change. Isn't to the language, isn't policy. Most of it is just rearranging and making it a little bit clearer for folks. So the first section is just the intent and purpose, which again is just, it's the why. Why are we doing this? Some of this language that's in the draft is virtually the same language that was a little bit later on in the existing regulations. Then just defining the maps, the fact that we use maps that define the overlay, and when is it applicable. And that's, the policy is not changing, it's just the language is a little bit different. So it's applying to any time there's any new structures, additions, or to existing structures, an expansion of non-permeable ground surface, for example, a new patio over a lawn area, or paving over a gravel or stone driveway. Any activity that requires a planning and zoning board of appeals, or zoning compliance certificate. So that's what triggers it. And then the requirements. So anything for any new land use activities within the Lake Watershed Protection Overlay Zone, people will have to do, which they're currently doing, a nutrient allocation worksheet. It'll estimate the amount of phosphorus runoff currently and after the proposed changes. And it's required that all increased runoff from proposed changes to surfaces are mitigated. And so the new, whatever you're changing has to be all mitigated. And if the parcel currently exceeds the maximum estimated phosphorus runoff, the existing runoff shall also be reduced by 10%. So it clarifies the language that we had before. It's not changing policy, it's just clarifying the language. The squeak you hear is my dog because she thinks I should be talking to her and not you guys. So then it also talks about section 2145 describes the worksheet and also clarifies the phraseology from before. And then the change to policy is 2146, mitigating a one-time surface change of 120 square feet or less. So activities involving a one-time change in surface type from pervious to non-pervious, such as erecting a shed or increasing a patio area that is less than 120 square feet in area, may not require nutrient allocation worksheet approval if the change in surface type is mitigated to capture the increased stormwater flow from the new non-pervious surface. The zoning agent can approve the addition of a shed to property that is 120 square feet or less if a gravel-filled trench is installed at the roof drip edge that is 12 inches wide and 18 inches deep. The zoning agent can approve an increased patio or deck area of 120 square feet or less if mitigated by a rain garden, 100 square feet in area, or 50-foot wide lawn swale downslope of the patio or deck that will detain/treat at least 2 inches of runoff rainfall that falls on the increased non-pervious surface area. At 2 inches is more than what we would require in the normal mitigation. The nutrient allocation worksheet, it's focused on the first 1 inch rainfall. And this is 2 inches, which is higher. Obviously, 2 inches is more than 1 inch, but this is something that's being self-mitigating. It's generally going to be most of the activities in the watershed that go through nutrient allocation worksheets are sheds, people putting up a shed. So putting gravel down underneath the shed, which the zoning agent would inspect to make sure everything was done correctly. And John Valenti, who I need to tell you all, he's retiring soon. He's
Done that a few times.
No, this is a real one. His wife's retired. His wife was a school teacher and she's retired. So now they want to travel a lot, and I'm happy for him, but I'm very sad for us because the knowledge
Yeah,
that
he's
he
got
has in his head is amazing. One of his comments was that, well, with gravel, when it's first installed, the gravel that will cover a 1 inch rainfall works fine, but gradually debris falls in, leaves fall in, turns into soil, and then it doesn't function as well. So John felt that 2 inches on the self-mitigation was something that we should be asking for. And so this is a one-time, so subsequent changes to surface types will require the nutrient allocation worksheet be completed. The next section on BMPs is just an educational, and it's the same information as before, just written a little bit differently so that it's laid out a little clearer. And just using it a little bit as a teaching tools as well, just that applicants can reduce total phosphorus runoff by 2 methods. They can change the type of the existing surfaces to ones that increase stormwater infiltration, or they can detain the stormwater in swales, ponds, underground chambers, etc. And then just different ways to the bullet points or site layout. These are the same Tips is in our current regulations. It's just organized a little bit differently and phraseology is a little different. But what you can do to the site, you can maintain as much pre-development vegetation. You can locate non-pervious areas to direct stormwater to desired locations, reduce the non-pervious, to minimize creation of steep slopes, encourage sheet flow of stormwater versus channelization, using vegetated swales, using permeable pavement that you maintain. And then other methods are just creating a native woodland. So the site layout is like when you're starting to do something, first think about things that maybe I could do it differently. And then others to improve what you already have from other previous development. Is you can create a native woodland, direct roof runoff to an underground detention basin of some sort, direct driveway runoff to a detention basin, direct lawn sheet flow to a rain garden or a lawn swale, and maintain mulched areas. The provisions and procedures for reduction of lake watershed protection requirements. This is talking about the mitigation when you can't come down to a zero runoff, which in most projects, other than new development that's on a fairly large wooded lot, any development is causes some additional runoff off the site. This is the same policy is current. It's just current. It's just bullet numbered differently, organized a little bit differently. We're also clarifying the demonstration that the property is not within the Columbia Lake watershed. Clarifying how to do that. It's happened since I've been here. There's been two properties. One property that was not in the watershed, that John Valenti and I looked at all the topography and studied it and decided that this parcel was not in the watershed. And another parcel, most of the parcel is in the watershed, but where they were putting the house drained away from. So everything that was being disturbed was draining away from the watershed. But we were just figuring it out on the fly as to how to do this because our current regulations don't really spell that out. So we thought it would be good to put something in the regulations to clarify that. And then there's some non-regulatory but suggested actions, and these are the same as what we've had currently, but again, organized a little bit differently. Now, 2 years ago, Henry Beck reviewed these and made a few changes which have not been incorporated in this. Most of it is of his phraseology is a little bit more for clarification, putting some things in quotation marks. He felt that the self-mitigating with a 2-inch rainfall coverage was too high. It should be 1 inch. But later on, as we're working through this, I can talk about his changes, or I'll incorporate his changes into our next version.
So this one is the one that was adopted in 2003?
There's two, we initially adopted this in 2003. So there's you've got one draft that's called existing. And then the other draft the version that says draft dated 10/23/18 is,
Okay, I got it. Okay.
man,
Got it. Got it.
Let's, if we could, go back to where the changes are proposed. And I want to understand where you came up with the specific parts of the recommendations. But before we get too far into it, let's go to 21.4.6 for a moment. Because most of this is pretty standard. We've worked through most of this before, but the one-time changes thing, I just want to use as a brief example my own experience when I improved my home. I ran into a kind of a wall, and that is I had a lot that could in no way meet the phosphorus runoff targets, so I had to achieve a 10% reduction. The problem with that, if you could call it a problem, it has to do with, what if I wanted to make a small change to the property later on? Would I have to go back and find another 10% reduction in order to accomplish a small change to the property? Or let's assume for a moment I was of the mindset to do every reasonable, cost-effective, best management practice and achieve better than a 10% reduction in my phosphorus runoff. And have I shot myself in the foot for the future, where if I wanted to do more items, I'd have a harder time achieving any net additional reduction at that point in the future? And tell me if you understand the concept I'm trying to explain.
Yeah.
So if you do the best possible job at mitigating phosphorus runoff when you're doing a big development project, and you go well beyond, and I did not go well beyond 10%, but you go well beyond 10%, are you hurting yourself in the future if you attempt to come back and make another substantive change to the property? So let's assume, it's hard to throw out a lot of numbers, but let's try and explore the concept. So there are a lot of people around the lake that want to do the best possible thing for the lake. And if they've got a project going on, they I would hope would mitigate to the greatest extent possible where it's cost effective on a project, as long as they have their site all torn up. Do you put in roof drains? Do you send all of your rain gutters going below ground into an infiltrator? If you don't have to do it, why would you do it anyway? I mean, it's a very effective way of mitigating phosphorus runoff from your property. It sends it below ground. The chance that it's going to leach into the lake is, well, it's going to be a long time coming, if ever. So
I'm thinking, Rick, suppose you do it the best you can and you get a 23% reduction. And then 5 years from now, you want to do something else and you can't get any more than, say, 6 or 7%. That's kind of what you're saying.
You're putting numbers that illustrate it well. And so, are we disincentivizing somebody doing as much as possible when they do a big construction project, as opposed to only aiming at just achieving a 10% reduction? And I think we'd be better health-wise as a lake if we incentivize everything. As long as somebody's come up with a comprehensive plan, coming up with a way for them to make changes in the future, I think is a reasonable approach here. And this is the one-time, let's say that the surface changes of 120 square feet or less as proposed, 21.4.6, do they have to be just a one-time change? Why limit it to one time? If somebody wants to add, some small appendage to their house, they want to add, and I'm looking at myself, and there may be a conflict here, and I'm always trying to be transparent about that. If I wanted to add a 4 foot wide by 15 foot long staircase, I could probably get away with this one time. But if I wanted to add a small overhang on a side roof later on, have I completely blown my ability to do that? Yeah. And does the science support that if they do these one-time small changes, one at a time, maybe one per year, one every 2 years, do we let them come back and do it again? Is there any reason not to let them do it a second time for small feature changes on the house. And maybe that's what we do. We address it this way as opposed to addressing the disadvantage that you're putting yourself at by doing the best possible job mitigating phosphorus during a large construction project. Any thoughts? I'm talking a lot about this.
One of the things that we talked about a few years ago was, let's say in a big construction project, you need to mitigate what you're adding for what hard surfaces, impermeable you're adding, and then another 10% reduction. Well, let's say what you could do is maybe the 10% reduction could be as much as 18% if you did a couple other things. We had talked about, well, maybe we should let people bank that 8%. So then the next time they would only need to do 2%. So put it in the bank.
I think these are all concepts we should explore because
I think
I'm trying to
that's-
give people flexibility, but ultimately one of the reasons for the success of the nutrient allocation plan was it was relatively straightforward to implement. If an end user, if a property owner wanted to do their own calculations, they could theoretically do it. And when Bob Cortman helped us design these regulations, he said you need to make these relatively easy to implement so that people don't skirt around them all the time. And I think we've achieved that. I hope we have. I don't know of a lot of people trying to duck around these regulations because they're relatively easy to meet. Dan, you're here as a member of the public, or are you also wearing a hat from Lake Management?
Hi, hi, both. Yeah, I'm here because I was involved in this 2 years ago too, on behalf of Lake Management. So yeah, definitely. And the discussion you're having, Rick, is exactly what we went over quite a bit at LMAT.
Oh, really?
Yeah, trying to figure out how to, and it's one thing even at one point someone said, hey, 10% is great. Why don't we make everybody make things 15% better? Which, we went to Dr. Cortman and he said, no, there's no reason. 10% has worked really well over these years. And he said, and if someone came to me and said, well, maybe only 5% better is going to work, he said it'd be hard to argue because the lake is in such great shape. And no one's suggesting we reduce that at all. But the finer points you're putting on it are exactly the kind of things we were talking about. Like Paula said, if you end up putting in, 18% reduction, and then maybe 3 years later you come back for your shed and you say, hey, I want to put my shed in and I'm still under my extra percentage I put in, and maybe that should be allowed.
We would definitely want to hear what you have to say. Your Lake Management has to say formally on this. I don't want to act quickly on this, or I'd like to act quickly, but I don't want to be hasty. And I really want input from all of the related parties, because even though this is a zoning regulation, it didn't start with us. It started with Lake Management. The whole nutrient allocation concept came from Lake Management,
Right.
and they did all the heavy lifting and really just presented this to zoning when we implemented this. And it was, and again, I go back to such a common sense approach to this that Bob Cortman, our lake expert, gave us. That make it easy for people to comply, and they will. And that's in essence what's happened. And look what's happened to our lake. We're the model of lake health. We have people that reach out and say, how did you achieve this? And I regularly deal with other lakes, and there's nothing quite like Columbia Lake. It just doesn't exist out there at this level.
Your topography helps an awful lot with where your water comes from. You don't have any major runoff going from far away or out of town,
But 30 years ago, we were going in the wrong direction, and now we're going in the right direction. And it's been from the work of the Lake Management Committee and the commitment of the town to follow through, and we've helped as a Planning and Zoning Commission, but it really centers around the Lake Management Committee. It came from them, and so I not defer as much as I relish their input on this. We've done as a town, we've done a very good job of paying homage to the value of the lake in our community.
Yeah, and I saw that this was picking up again, so I wanted to just listen tonight, and next week we'll have our LMAC meeting, so we'll, put everybody on notice that we're gonna nail this down now.
So what, we're looking, I think, Paula, the way you phrase this is a great way to start to approach it. I would really like to know what everyone else thinks. Coming up with a system of banking some of these improvements to the nutrient allocation, to the phosphorus runoff calculation, so that somebody's incentivized to do as much as possible. Because when you're doing a large construction project, doing quite a bit more may not be that expensive. But if you're going to hold off because you might want to do something in the future, because you might be penalized for having done it all at one time, let's make it the best possible thing for the lake is really what
I would argue in favor of being able to bank it, because when you're doing the initial construction, that's the time when you've got the equipment there. It's be relatively easy. The marginal added cost to make improvements would probably be as low as it's ever going to be. So this way here, you could probably way undershoot your allocation, and now you got it in the bank. And the other good thing about that is if it's in the bank, that means you have several years where you've got this ultra low phosphorus runoff. You're in effect incentivizing people to do things earlier than they need to.
Yep.
So that you're integrated over a number of years, you're going to get the greatest possible reduction in runoff that way.
How do the other members, I just want to get an idea here, because I'd like to give Dan a perspective, a commission perspective as he goes back to LMAC.
I think it's a great idea.
Dan, if you could look into that and banking, I think a combination of banking it and or one-time small changes where there's a small change like an overhang, allowing them to just mitigate that amount so that there's no additional phosphorus, but having a limited amount of those changes over a specific time frame. And to make it one time, if you want to add a stoop on the side of the house 5 years down the road, we don't want to say, well, you did an overhang on the front door, now you can't do it on the side door. I'd like to come up with something that's fair and realistic and doesn't hurt the lake, but doesn't hurt your ability to use your property and make some changes over time. So, but the idea of, Paula, I hadn't thought of banking. Where did that come from? Because it's a great idea.
I
think
don't
that
know.
that was talked about a couple years ago when we were touching on this amongst all of us.
You can remember that? Rich,
I remember this.
Impressed. Okay.
I don't remember if it was Dan and I talking, because we worked together a few times on this. I don't remember where it came from, but and it could have been Connie and I or John and I. I don't know.
I think that seems
I
like
haven't looked at this in 2 years, so my memory's not too bad, but I can't remember exactly.
I think it came from the realization that, let's say you did something, and in fact, changing the windows in your house would trigger the need for 10% reduction because it was tied into a building permit, no matter what it was for. And then you realize that 5 years later, you might want to do something else you need a building permit for, and you need to do another 10%. So in the end, you could be doing 20, 30% reductions in your phosphorus for projects that had nothing to do with affecting your runoff.
Right.
And so the concept was, hey, we got to figure out a way to, make this really workable so that you don't disincentivize people from doing what they should do.
okay.
Same thing. I think we also got to keep in mind too, property sizes. Some of the larger properties, you're not going to create any runoff when you have 5, 6, 10 acres, unless it's running directly into a waterway, So, if you have 5 acres and you put a shed on, chances of that getting it onto another property and running off are way slimmer, because you probably have a lot more open space, a lot more ground, permeable surface. We had talked about, percentage of lands, like a small lot, you put a driveway and house on it, you're up there using 40% of the permeable land. If you throw a garage or something, those are all considerations that need to be looked at.
So Paul, yeah, Dan, banking things and coming up with an approach where I don't know that we need to make one-time surface changes, 120 square feet. I don't know that we need to make them one time. Maybe we can limit the number. We don't want somebody to put together a series of 120 square foot changes over 5 years to add 500 square feet of patio area. You know, that we don't want to be able to circumvent the spirit of this. But I think, you know, not calling it one time, but having some sort of time limit, or, you know, every 2 years or something to that effect. I don't know. We need to think through this. I'd love to get some input about that. So if you could focus on the proposed changes, Dan, at LMAC 21.4.6, think about banking and think about whether we do want to limit this to one time. We really would value input on that.
Okay.
And anything else that's in here, obviously.
Paul, it has been a long
know,
time, so I'm not sure I can dig up my stuff. Can you send me the existing and the proposed?
I certainly will.
Thank you.
Yeah, Paula will do that.
The intent of the regulations isn't for new windows or replacing your roof. And I don't think that we're doing that. I mean,
No, we're
I'm
not.
not yeah, okay.
Part of when that
Well,
got transferred over to P&Z and our planning and the building department was to separate that out. So
We
that's
clearly
been,
don't want that to trigger. We don't want
No,
No.
yeah.
things that
yeah.
don't affect the
it
surface.
used to, and it hasn't been for the last 3
Okay,
or 4
okay,
years.
Okay.
Okay.
If not longer, yeah, because the draft says, within the watershed, these regulations shall apply to all new structures, additions to existing structures, and expansion of non-permeable ground surfaces. So it's not replacing windows and doors.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that what you're
Yeah,
proposing is, or even that,
I don't think that was the intent from the beginning.
no, it's not, but it
Okay.
was that way
Okay,
when this process got, you know,
okay.
5, 6 years ago, that was the case, I think.
Or in 2003 when it first started, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let me go forward to 21.4.10. And going down to some of the bullet points, where you said use of sand fill materials with a phosphorus attenuation capacity exceeding 1 kilogram per cubic foot. Where does a value like that come from, Paula? What was the source of that kind of science?
That source of that science is our limnologist, Dr. Cortman, because that's what he had in the existing language of 21.4.5.
Okay.
It says exactly that.
Okay. That's answers my question. Well, keeping this relatively simple and and a lot of people look at the nutrient allocation table and their eyes glaze over. But if you spend about 5 to 10 minutes talking through what it really represents, most people can get it, especially if it's a property owner around the lake. I think many, you know, it's a digestible explanation. It's pretty straightforward science. And that's been the key to the success, I think, part of the key anyway.
The other change that we made a couple of years ago, we made it in-house, was just, and Dan can attest to it, to how well it works anyway. We revised the spreadsheet so that it was more user-friendly. And it's designed so that you first put in what you currently have. And then the next sheet, all that information rolls over automatically into the next sheet. And that sheet, you go in and say what you're putting on in the building, or what you're building, what you're changing in surfaces. And it gives you immediately how much you need to mitigate. And then towards the bottom, you can say, okay, well, let me play around with some things. I can take 500 square feet of lawn and move it to, a mulch bed. What impact did that have? And it's just very easy to play around with all sorts of different what if scenarios, which you used to have to do on scratch paper and a calculator and then input it. So that's making it, I think, easier for a lot of people. Been, including staff, have been very happy with that. Dan, I know you've done a couple of them using the new spreadsheet. You're muted, Dan.
Yeah, no, that works well, that spreadsheet. Is that
So I
something
think-
that, I know when we were looking at that before though, I think there may be new surface types or trying to add in maybe how the effect of the slope of the land. Is that something that Dr. Cortman would look at to verify or to suggest what proper runoff coefficients are for different surfaces, or how does that?
He submitted to us in 2003 coefficients for multiple surfaces. The old spreadsheet only had 5 or 6 of those, but he already gave us coefficients for that. John Valenti is an advocate for also taking slope into consideration. I think that's pushing it outside of a layperson's ability to do, but.
Yeah, and it's also, in my opinion, kind of get into the micro management of it, because when you really think about it, we're looking at the whole watershed. You're using different runoff coefficients if you're an A, B, or C because of how far you are away from the lake. And a lot of it's a very broad brush for which that type of science is. You can't look at where this driveway is versus that driveway. Well, it's a half mile away. You're looking at the whole picture. So it's really a conglomerate of everything, which is why you can get away with using, a certain coefficient, even though it's in a different location than someone who's further away. It's just a big picture kind of thing. So if you look at grass and you say, well, this has a certain runoff coefficient, by default, you've already considering all the different types of slopes that there might be grass on. It's kind of factored into what's been assigned to grass wherever you're looking at it.
Dan, we left the structure of the spreadsheet in an administrative task, meaning Paula can, in essence, she would come to us and talk about it, but she make changes as science changes so that it's not wedded to a regulation and can't change over time. And it's worked, and should we as a commission review the structure of a spreadsheet and say, it's got to be this way? I don't want us to do that.
No.
I want it to be a dynamic, changing process and administered to the best we have the best staff we've ever had in our building office. It's working well the way it is. And so it can change in structure based on recommendations from the outside.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's just a tool that's implementing the regulation.
Yes.
And I am a easily 40-year, if not 50-year, 40-year Excel geek or spreadsheet geek. So I've worked really hard at doing spreadsheets for other people in my consulting work that a layperson who doesn't understand Excel or a spreadsheet can do it. One of the things that we still need to do for this, which is half drafted, is like the cover sheet for the spreadsheet, so that somebody can do it totally on their own now. As it works now, Connie opens it with them and talks to them about it. There's green cells where if it's green, you type into it. If it's not green, you can't type into it. So it's with just a few little cues to the person, they're pretty adept at figuring out how to put it together.
That's great.
Over the last, at some point in the recent past, and I wish I could be more specific than that, I've seen statistics that have been put forth about the relative quality of the lake, the reduction in phosphorus that's been achieved over the amount of time that the Lake Management Committee has been in existence, and the length of time where we've actively managed the lake health. And it would be helpful when we have a public hearing on a regulation change like that to input some of that longer term result information into the public record. So to the extent that you can get that, Paula, or that you have it,
Yeah.
Dan, I would appreciate being able to read a narrative, short, a paragraph or so during this period of time, the nutrient and especially since we had the nutrient allocation table, what the result of it has been, because it really speaks volumes about the fact that we don't need to make it that much more complicated. We just simply need to keep it going in the right direction.
Dr. Cortman sends the information to LMAC. I never receive it. So
Yeah, no, we can get that.
That would be great. And it's even if it's public testimony or it's submitted as a written document forwarded from Dr. Cortman to us, but I would like to bring that into the public record on the zoning side of things.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on this tonight, everybody?
Don't made progress.
Okay. So let's get some feedback from LMAC. Dan, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight.
Will do.
And let's go to work on this. And what I talked about the lake watershed, I was hoping that, let's not dig that up tonight, but I really want to talk about what the plan is for all of the undeveloped land in the lake watershed. I just don't want to put it off until the next development boom. Okay, with that, we're gonna move on to item 9, communication and reports. Anything, Paula?
nothing for me.
Okay. Anything open discussion, everybody? Dan?
Dan saying goodbye.
Oh, thank you
All
again.
right, just saying goodbye.
Okay. And audiences of citizens, anything?
I'm concerned about the watershed too. And as chairman of open space, I'm working on it.
I just don't want to wait to dig into this issue. It's so much at the front of my mind, and there's a lot of discussion that we need to have. I want to be careful about what we decide to have a public discussion about, and make sure it's what we want to have in the public domain at any given point in time. I'm not trying to hide anything. We should be careful to
Right.
only address it in a way
In
that's time
executive
appropriate.
session.
Actually, we
well,
can't have an executive session. We're a regulatory board.
Well,
Yeah, we have to have all of our discussions public. But the point, and I've only talked about open space in the watershed. Not open space, but undeveloped land in the watershed. And that's how we should probably keep this discussion. But to the extent that we may want to have a more broad discussion, I would hope that as we work through this, we do get to that on our list. We don't have a lot of development issues ahead of us. Our schedule has never been as open as what it is right now. So, while we'll probably cancel a December meeting if we don't absolutely need it, depends on what December brings us. Maybe an early December meeting is a yes, but a later December meeting is a no. Does everyone think that's a solid idea?
Yeah.
Sounds good to
That's
me.
okay.
Okay.
Good.
We may have an application coming to us on December 14th. They initially thought they would be ready for tonight.
Okay.
But I would rather not talk about it until we actually get an application in.
I'd rather not also. So that being said, next up on the agenda is
Motion
item
to
12.
We need to get EJ to call in at a certain time every night and make the motion to adjourn, or remind us to motion to adjourn.
I'll make a
Yes,
motion
you're
to
right.
adjourn.
Rich just made it. I'll second it. All those in favor? Just raise your hand. Vera, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I raised my hand.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you,
Happy
everybody.
Thanksgiving.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Take care.
Flo,
everyone.
thank you. Paula, thank you.
You're welcome.
I
Stay well.
appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye. Here you go.
It's down to us.
Somebody's off. Bye. Well, that
Did you
was.
stop the recording?
Oh, shoot.